I grabbed coffee recently with an old friend. He'd just gotten back from this really intense 10-day silent meditation retreat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he looked physically lighter, almost vibrating with this newfound clarity.
You could really see it on him.
Oh, absolutely. For the first 20 minutes, he was practically glowing. He described this one sunrise where he felt he had finally, broken through. He told me this anxiety that had been dogging him for a decade. It was just gone. He kept tapping at the table, saying, "I'm a new man. I finally get it. I felt the truth."
That's incredibly powerful, the power of just pure experience.
It was so compelling. You felt this immense respect for it. To him, all the books he'd read on mindfulness were just trash now. He said he had the real thing.
Right. Why read the map when you visited the city?
Exactly. But then we met up again just 3 weeks later.
Oh, no.
Same cafe, same table. But the guy sitting across from me he was a ghost of that person. The clarity was gone. It was replaced by that old, familiar twitchiness and cynicism. It didn't stick. I asked him about the retreat, and he just shrugged. He looked almost embarrassed. He couldn't really explain what had happened anymore. The feeling had faded, and because he hadn't wrapped any specific words or concepts around it, any structure at all, the insight had just slipped through his fingers like water.
That is a perfect, almost tragic example of a core philosophical problem.
It really is. He had the experience, the revelation, but he completely lacked what you'd call the propositional knowledge to keep it alive.
He thought the feeling was enough, that it would be self-sustaining.
And it wasn't. The experience was just cannibalized by his daily routine. It really forces you to ask a tough question. We always say ideas are cheap, experience what matters. But if that's true, why did my friend lose his truth so easily?
Why is it that without that safety net of philosophy, of reason, our most profound experiences might actually just be destined to disappear?
That story is a beautiful illustration of the core tension at the heart of epistemology, isn't it? The study of knowledge itself.
It is, and that's what we're going to be diving into. That central contrast between the profound revelation-based knowledge, the experience, and the conceptual, reasoned, structured knowledge, the proposition.
It's the difference between, seeing the sunset
and being able to explain the physics of the light spectrum. Both are a form of knowing, but they are not the same thing.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is to take this philosophical tension and see why these structured ideas, why reason is so vital. And not just for some abstract theory, but for holding on to our most important truths across 3 huge domains.
Right. We're looking at how this plays out in the modern university.
In how we craft public policy.
And maybe most visibly in how we survive modern politics.
It's all about the mechanism of sustainability.
Yeah.
We're looking for the scaffolding that holds up the structure of, a life well lived and a society that actually works.
To even start, we really need to lay out the philosophical boundaries here. What do we even mean by knowledge? When philosophers try to define it, they traditionally break it down into 3 types. Though, the Western intellectual tradition has overwhelmingly favored just one of them.
That's the one we all know from school, propositional knowledge.
Exactly. Sometimes called declarative knowledge.
The classic definition, going all the way back to Plato, is justified true belief, right? JTB.
That's the one. This is the knowledge you can articulate, you can express in a statement, a proposition. It needs 3 things. You have to believe it, it has to actually be true, and you need a good reason, some justification for believing it.
So it's knowledge you get from evidence, from argument, or just from reading a book or a scientific paper.
Precisely. Propositional knowledge is the map. It defines the terrain conceptually. If I say the capital of France is Paris, and you believe me, and I can show you a map, that's propositional knowledge.
But the world isn't just a collection of facts on a map. We live in it, we experience it.
Which brings us to the second category. Acquaintance, or experiential knowledge.
This is knowing a person or a place, or knowing what it's like to have an experience.
Yes. Think of knowing the taste of a really good dark chocolate, or just knowing the color blue when you see it. You get it through direct perception, direct interaction with the world.
It's the terrain itself, not the map.
That's the perfect analogy.
And that highlights its biggest limitation, doesn't it? You can't describe the color blue to someone born blind. You know what it is like, but you can't fully communicate that in words alone.
Exactly. Bertrand Russell called this knowledge by acquaintance versus knowledge by description. Acquaintance is the direct experience. Description is the propositional knowledge about it. You can describe the theory of love for years.
But you only know love by acquaintance.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the third category is procedural knowledge, or knowledge how.
The skill to do something.
Right.
Yeah.
Knowing how to drive a car or play the piano or even navigate a really tricky social situation. You can memorize the driver's manual, that's propositional knowledge, but you only get the procedural knowledge through practice.
It's the difference between studying the physics of cycling and actually being able to ride the bicycle.
Yeah.
They're linked, but they are fundamentally different ways of knowing.
Now, what makes all this a bit more complicated is that knowledge doesn't just differ in its content, but in how easy it is to talk about.
It's articulability.
Yes. And this brings in a different way of dividing things up, the explicit versus tacit divide.
This is so crucial. Explicit knowledge is the easy stuff, in a way. It's codified, you can write it down, put it in a manual. It's easy to store and teach.
But then you have tacit knowledge, and it's elusive, it's personal, it's tied to expertise, to intuition. It's the feel or the touch of something.
It's the secret ingredient that's not in the recipe.
That's a great way to put it.
There's a classic story from the world of science that really drives home the value of the tacit. The Canadian TA laser developed back in the 60s.
Oh, right. The British labs tried to replicate it.
They did. They had the full blueprints, the complete written instructions, all the explicit codified knowledge, and they failed over and over again.
They failed because they were missing the tacit knowledge. The research showed that the replication only worked when someone who had physically helped build the original laser was there, on site.
It was almost like a craft. A master-apprentice relationship. You had to be there to get the feel for it, the practical wisdom that just wasn't written down.
And the reason it wasn't written down is because, as the original research said, no prescription for it exists. You can't write it down. You pass it on by example, by observation.
It reminds me of the idea of connoisseurship. You can measure every single metric of a great pianist performance. The pressure on the keys, the exact tempo.
All the propositional data.
Right. But that prized touch, the actual quality that makes it brilliant, that escapes measurement. Judging that quality relies on a deep, personal, tacit form of knowing.
So if we pull all this together, tacit knowledge is this invisible foundation. It underlies our skills, our procedural knowledge, and it gives real meaning to our propositional knowledge. It stops the words from just being empty symbols.
So the goal of rigorous thought, of building these propositional structures, isn't to replace that intuitive knowing.
No, not at all. It's to create a structure capable of capturing, articulating, and most importantly, sustaining the insight you get from that experience.
Which brings us right to our first case study, where this tension is playing out in a really dramatic way. The modern university.
The university used to have a pretty clear purpose, right? Seek objective truth, be the guardian of culture. But some philosophers argue that with globalization and market forces, it sort of lost its way. It became, as one put it, a post-historical entity.
It just exists.
Yeah.
Without a clear why, beyond administrative goals.
That instrumentalization, turning education into just job training, that sets the stage. But the real crisis deepens when the very idea of intellectual authority gets challenged by identity-based epistemology.
This is where we see the most direct rejection of that propositional framework we've been talking about.
And that leads us to the story of Dr. Thorne, the history professor who realized the ground had shifted under his feet.
What happened with him?
Well, he taught a very rigorous course on the Industrial Revolution. It was built on classic propositional knowledge, economic data, trade policy, things you can measure and argue with evidence.
The old school way.
The old school way. The problem started when a student challenged his whole framework, not with different evidence, but with their lived experience. They claimed that this kind of objective analysis erased their specific ancestral trauma.
So the argument wasn't about the facts. It was that the very method of using facts was oppressive.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The student was essentially saying that their personal, non-falsifiable truth should take precedence over the shared, testable framework of historical analysis.
And what did the institution do?
That's the crux of it. The university department, in this case, prioritized affirming the student's subjective reality. They basically accepted the premise that truth is just a localized perspective. They failed to defend the necessity of objective inquiry.
And that's where the structural rot starts. A professor's authority is supposed to come from their command of a body of knowledge that's testable, that's shared, that goes beyond individual feeling.
But if you throw that out in favor of individual feelings that can't be challenged,
then the common ground you need for education just dissolves. You lose the structure.
And the immediate consequence is the decay of meritocracy. If there's no shared standard that transcends identity, the university's intellectual authority collapses. The value of its degrees starts to go down.
Instead of elevating students out of their limited perspectives through disciplined thinking, it just becomes a place that affirms the worldview they already walked in with.
Now, we should be nuanced here. The sources are clear that academia did historically ignore marginalized voices. Listening to lived experience is vital for empathy, for understanding the limits of our existing theories.
Of course.
But the analysis warns that if we completely replace the pursuit of objective truth with a collection of conflicting, unchallengeable personal truths, we lose our ability to do shared analysis and, critically, to find shared solutions.
You end up with a generation that has immense feeling, deep experiential knowledge, but maybe lacks the conceptual tools, the propositional framework, to scale that feeling into actionable knowledge that works beyond their own small group.
But there is a counter-argument. The philosopher Ronald Barnett offers a more optimistic take. He thinks philosophy can actually reclaim the university's future by doubling down on structural thinking.
But not in a rigid, backwards-looking way.
No, exactly. He insists that philosophy can't just be, as he puts it, the owl of Minerva spreading its wings only at dusk, just documenting what's already dead and gone. It has to be active. It has to grapple with the university as an entity that is constantly becoming.
So it's about what the university ought to be, not just what it is.
That's it. His whole approach is about inventing new concepts, creating what he calls alternative imaginaries for the institution. He sees it as this dialectical process, moving between the messy real and the ambitious ideal. His phrase is keeping your head in the clouds but feet on the ground.
I like that. It acknowledges the reality of the university today, the commercialism, the politics, while still insisting on articulating a higher purpose.
And he connects this whole task to the idea of ecological crises. He says the university's crisis is a crisis of relationality. It can't see itself as separate from the world's big problems.
So the instrumentalization of knowledge treating the world and people as just resources to be used has damaged the university's relationship with the world.
Exactly. And Barnett says philosophy's job is to help repair that. The hard, propositional work of creating new concepts isn't about defending some dusty old tradition. It's about generating the framework needed to navigate a complex future, to give the university a purpose again, a sustainable purpose.
Yeah, so if the university is struggling to maintain a shared truth, how can we possibly expect government to sustain public trust when it makes policy? That takes us to our next case study, scaling up local wisdom.
Local success is often the purest example of that experiential knowledge we talked about. It's based on unwritten rules, social bonds, high trust.
Things that are really hard to just copy and paste.
Impossible, really. And when policymakers try, they often skip the hard propositional work. They skip the abstraction.
Which brings us to the cautionary tale of the ghost city of the Green Initiative and the bureaucrat, Elena.
Elena saw this remote village that had a miraculous community-led waste management system. It worked perfectly. But its success was entirely dependent on this deep, local, high-trust social capital. Everybody knew everybody.
And she thought, this is brilliant, let's do this everywhere.
She got a huge grant to replicate it nationally, starting in the capital city.
And her mistake was the same one as my friend from the retreat. She only focused on the experience of the solution, the aesthetics.
She copied the form, the color of the bins, the pickup schedule, without translating the underlying principles of why it worked. She didn't do the hard work of rational abstraction.
She didn't ask why people in the village participated.
Exactly. And so the policy collapsed instantly. In the anonymous, low-trust world of a major city, the incentives that work in a small village-like social shame or community pride meant absolutely nothing.
The money was wasted, and the whole thing fell apart.
And it's just a tragic story because her intentions were so good. It proves that pure empathy without propositional structure doesn't just fail, it can actually do real harm.
It corrodes democracy. The public doesn't see a complex policy failure. They just see an incompetent government that can't get anything right.
And that erodes social trust, which is so hard to build back.
So the lesson is that local experiential knowledge, it's the seed of innovation, but it has to go through that hard work of rational abstraction. You have to figure out the universal rules that make it work before you can scale it.
You have to codify those rules. And this leads to a broader point about how professionals actually operate. They're constantly mixing the explicit and the tacit, especially when time is short.
The work of Michael Eros is really useful here. He breaks down professional decision-making into 3 modes.
Right. There's the analytic mode, which is the gold standard, following the explicit evidence-based guidelines, the rule book.
But then there's the intuitive mode. This is where experience is king. It's that rapid, recognition-primed decision-making, the gut feeling of an experienced surgeon or firefighter.
And that intuitive action is essential because you just don't have time to run a full analysis on every single thing. Think about medicine. The explicit research-based guidelines might only cover, say, 20% of the decisions a doctor makes.
Wow, that low.
It can be. The other 80% rely on that situational understanding, that rapid, intuitive response that comes from tacit experience.
But relying purely on that gut feeling, on unexamined tacit knowledge, is dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous because the way we gather tacit knowledge is inherently biased. We remember the traumatic, attention-grabbing events, the outliers, not the thousands of routine cases.
So our intuition can be built on a skewed perception of reality.
It can be. And this is where Arra's 3rd mode comes in, deliberation. This is reflection, it's problem solving, it's critical scrutiny, it's the process of subjecting your tacit intuitive hunches to a rigorous propositional analysis.
It's the check and balance.
It's the necessary control mechanism. Without that deliberation, the implicit, often biased knowledge can override what you've explicitly learned, and that leads to big mistakes.
Okay, so we've seen how institutions and policy need this propositional structure to be sustainable. Now we have to turn to politics, where the fight between propositional truth facts and experiential truth narrative is at its most raw.
And where, so often, narrative just wins, hands down.
The scenario of the political debate with Marcus, the economist, against the populist leader just captures this perfectly. Marcus comes armed with what we call falsifiable propositional knowledge.
GDP data, complex economic models, logical arguments for free trade. The works.
He gives his 2 minutes of cold, hard complexity, and the audience is just silent because it's hard to process that stuff on the fly.
And then the populist leader steps up, and they don't offer counter data. They offer an emotionally resonant experiential narrative. A simple, compelling story about one factory worker named Joe who lost his job.
They didn't have to refute Marcus's data at all.
Yeah.
They just used Joe's lived experience to paint Marcus as morally bankrupt, as someone who cares about numbers, not people.
And the populist won the room, instantly. It just shows the immense strategic advantage of bypassing the logic center and going straight for that emotional connection.
This maps perfectly onto Walter Fisher's theory, the narrative paradigm.
It really does. His theory is a direct challenge to the classical rational world paradigm.
Which is the idea that people are persuaded by logic, by evidence, by sound reasoning, the paradigm that Marcus the economist was banking on.
And Fisher's point was, that's not how humans work. He proposed we are fundamentally Homo narrans storytelling animals. We see the world as a set of stories, and a good story is almost always more persuasive than a dry argument.
So in this paradigm, an argument isn't judged by logic, but by something called narrative rationality, which has 2 parts, right? Coherence and fidelity.
Exactly. Coherence is just, does the story hang together? Does it make internal sense?
But fidelity is the killer app in politics.
It is. Fidelity is, does the story ring true to the audience? Does it fit with their own experiences, their values, their existing beliefs? If a story has high fidelity, it can change minds, regardless of whether it's factually accurate.
And that's why Marcus lost. The story about Joe had massive fidelity for an audience that already felt left behind economically. It felt truer than all of Marcus's spreadsheets combined.
Which brings us to the political weaponization of this, where people will knowingly support statements that are factually wrong misinformation if that falsehood supports what they feel is a deeper truth.
The research on this is fascinating. Like when a politician tweeted an exaggerated claim about migrants, voters would admit the numbers weren't quite right, but they supported it anyway.
Because it fit their deeper core belief that immigration policy should be stricter. The factual error was less important than the message it sent about what they prioritized.
The researchers called this moral flexibility. It seems that partisan voters on all sides unconsciously shift their standards.
They hold their opponents to a really rigorous factual standard. Every single word has to be perfect.
But for their own side, they suspend that standard. They justify the non-factual claims because they send the right message.
It's not that the voters are stupid or easily tricked. It's that they are making a moral calculation that the narrative that informs their worldview is more important than a specific factual error. The error is seen as a strategic tool for a deeper truth.
Which is a sobering thought for anyone who believes that just presenting the facts is enough.
The conclusion is you can't rely on just being factually correct. The counter-strategy isn't to abandon narrative, it's to learn how to articulate your own dry principles by telling better, more persuasive stories that connect to the human condition.
You have to integrate the propositional structure with narrative impact. You need both the truth and a story that gives it fidelity.
We've covered these big societal consequences of losing that propositional structure in our universities, in our government, in our politics. But now we have to come back to where we started.
To my friend. And that profound personal loss of truth.
Ultimately, the core function of reason, of propositional structure, isn't just about discovery. It's about maintenance.
It's how you hold on to what you found.
Yes. The whole process of thinking, of writing, of speaking, it's about transforming something we know, that intuition, that retreat experience, into something we understand.
And you do that by subjecting the insight to what you called conceptual meditation, the hard work of building propositional knowledge about it.
And that work is necessary because otherwise the insight is just lost. It gets worn down by habit. The clarity from the retreat disappeared because it wasn't conceptually anchored anywhere.
It's a deep irony, isn't it? Thinking by itself doesn't change our lives, but the experiences that do change us. They can't sustain that change without thinking.
The propositional knowledge is the scaffolding. It's the safety net for our most important personal truths.
There's a concept in some theological traditions that God sustains being. It feels like a parallel here.
It is. Reason, through propositional knowledge, is on the side of remembering, of sustaining what we gain through experience. Without that conscious articulation of why it mattered and what it meant, the feeling is just going to fade.
On top of that, it also acts as a defense mechanism. We need that logical structure to avoid being manipulated.
Both by others and by our own minds. The brain's natural tendency is to simplify things to save energy. It leads to what some call self-enclosure. We reduce everything to simple binaries, good or bad, with us or against us.
That's the A/A thinking.
Exactly. And if we don't actively engage in reasoned thought, we just default to that. We accidentally absorb these simplistic, dehumanizing perspectives because they're easy.
And we lose the ability to see nuance, to handle complexity, the A/B thinking, which is essential for living in a pluralistic world.
Reason is the tool that keeps us intellectually open. The feeling my friend had on the retreat doesn't tell him whether reality is simple or complex. Making that choice, holding on to that complexity, requires conceptual work. To avoid it is to default to simplification.
And that is the ultimate function of the safety net.
Yeah.
It lets us keep a hold on these truths we find through experience. When things get tough, when you're filled with doubt, understanding why something is true gives you the ability to defend it, to prevent it from slipping away.
So reason changes us, but indirectly. It structures the profound but fleeting experience so that it can actually last, so it can be applied in a messy, complicated world.
To bring this whole deep dive full circle then, the challenge my friend faced after his retreat is the same challenge facing academia, policy, and politics today.
If we relied only on the power and immediacy of experience, we're giving up on sustainability, on scalability, on defensibility.
Propositional knowledge, the product of that rigorous conceptual work, is the necessary scaffolding. It's what allows us to take the profound but shaky foundation of experiential knowledge and build something lasting on top of it.
Something that works not just for ourselves in our own lives, but in our shared public institutions as well. That hard, often dry work of reasoning is the ultimate and I think indispensable tool for sustaining clarity and truth in a complex society.